Hello and welcome everybody to this webinar on American wine regions. My name's Edward Wicks. I'm an educator for the WSET, teaching wine and spirit qualifications. The WSET, of course, is the world's leading provider of qualifications and courses in wine, spirits and sake. WSET has now got over 50 years of experience in designing and delivering these qualifications in over 70 countries through a network of 800 course providers, over 800 course providers. Our qualifications are available in 15 languages as well, so very exciting. If you're interested in finding out more and starting your WSET learning, please visit wsetglobal.com to find your nearest provider. Just a bit of housekeeping. This webinar, of course, will be recorded and will then be available to watch back on the WSET Global Events Hub on our YouTube. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please do post them in the Q&A box. And at the end, I will try and cover as many as possible. So yes, with that out of the way, thank you and welcome again, and especially to our American audience, I wish you all a very happy 4th of July. Perfect timing to do this webinar on some of the key American wine regions. Just a brief moment of to go over the kind of history of American viticulture and grape growing. So the first kind of European explorers that arrived in America were actually Viking, approximately about 500 years before Christopher Columbus in about 1000 AD. Leif Erikson arrived, and they were startled at the amount of vines that were growing in America and in kind of the north east, kind of New England and kind of Canadian area of North America. So they named it Vinland in regards to this. Now, these vine species that were growing in North America were different to the species of vine that we're suitable that evolved in Europe and Asia, and is the grape varieties that we're familiar with are all mostly part of this Eurasian kind of species. The American species were not so suitable for wine production, had some very unusual aromas when turned into wine. So it fast forward 600 or so years later, because of these unusual aromas, further settlers from Europe brought over grape varieties they were familiar with and started planting vineyards across their new areas that they'd settled. Further onto this, it wasn't really until about the 1780s, so later part of the 1700s, that vines were started to being planted in California. And this is very important. California is now by far the most largest producer of American wines. The climate is particularly suitable. So this can really be the epicenter of where vines really started to spread and had great success in producing fantastic quality. It wasn't all easy sailing. In the previous century, the early part of the 1900s, prohibition laws were introduced across America that really hampered the amount that was being produced and really negatively affected the quality of wines for several decades that were being produced. And it wasn't really until more modern times, when these laws, after these laws were repealed, that producers were able to really pick up the ball again and start getting back onto the world stage and producing superb quality wines. Fast forward to today, America is now the 4th largest grower of grapes after the powerhouses of Italy, Spain and France in Europe. So hugely important area for quality wines that are exported across the world. So this very large map where we're going to be looking, we're going to be looking in 3 key areas. California is going to be our focus. As I said, 85% of all wines come from California, so it's going to be the most crucial to kind of get our heads around. The Pacific Northwest, states of Oregon and Washington, combined produce about 6.5% of American wines, so much smaller, but really important areas for quality wine production and getting a lot of attention. And then over to the northeast on the Atlantic coast, New York State produces about 3.5% of all American wines. So Again, small compared to the big powerhouse, but still very important for some quality wines that we'll talk about. So California, and it's the kind of the large areas that we can find under vine here, and it's really due to the particular climate that we have that makes it very suitable for the production of quality wines. We have areas further inland that are significantly warmer. We see this large kind of depression between the mountains to the east and the kind of coastal mountains that you can see here. And this area is known as the Central Valley. And this produces over half of all Californian wines. It's very warm, very fertile soils, so it's fantastic for a lot of agriculture, including grape growing. And here we can see a huge range of styles, going from our more inexpensive mass market favorites to small pockets of premium quality wines as well. A lot of focus that people will talk about on Californian wines will be the kind of more coastal areas further away from this Central Valley, close to the coast. There is a very cold Pacific Ocean current that travels past the west coast of California, and this really helps cool vineyards quite drastically, giving a range of different microclimates that can result in many different styles of wine being produced from a great variety of grape varieties. And this is going to be shown in various different ways, but one of the most kind of drastic and impactful features of this cooling effect from the coast is these large ocean fogs that move inland and kind of blanket our vineyards in this cold air. And really helps cool down our growing. Over the course of the day, these fogs settle overnight and are present in the morning, but over the course of the day, the heat of the sun dissipates these fogs and it gets much, much warmer. But that respite from that intense sun can really help provide us freshness and acidity in certain grape varieties. One in particular, Pinot Noir, this is a grape variety. It's the third most planted grape variety in California. But it really does require the coolest parts of the state. It's a grape variety that is notorious for having very high levels of acidity, low to medium levels of tannins, and some very intense red fruit characteristics. We'll generally find American producers aging their quality Pinot Noirs in oak barrels to give that nice vanilla-y kind of characteristic. So as I said, this is a grape variety that requires the kind of coolest, most coastal sites. So we'll see Sonoma County, especially the south of Sonoma, which we'll see a little bit later, closest to the ocean, being most suitable for the production of Pinot Noirs. And even though it's much further to the south, Santa Barbara County gets an awful lot of this coastal influence, lots of these cooling fogs and cooling winds that come off the coast, and produces some really exceptional and very fresh fruited Pinot Noirs in particular. So yeah, I wanted to really focus on two important valleys today, Sonoma and Napa valleys. So we saw the kind of the lower end of the valleys in the previous slide being really suitable for Pinot Noir production. And that's because of San Pablo Bay, which is allowing some of this cooling influence, these fogs and these winds, to really kind of penetrate the southern end of these valleys. And these cooling effects can help being drawn up the valleys to give some kind of cooler sites slightly further to the north. But as we go further north in these valleys, the surrounding mountains really protect and shelter these valleys from our cooling effects. So we're going to see our vineyards get progressively warmer the further north we're going to go. So the northern and central parts of Napa Valley and the northern parts of Sonoma are going to be less suitable for Pinot Noir production and more suitable for grape varieties that are able to tolerate a much warmer kind of climate. And the main grain of grape varieties we're going to see in places like this and across California and in many parts across America are Chardonnay. Chardonnay is our most planted grape variety. we're generally going to see quite ripe flavors. We're going to see lots of ripe, almost cooked apple, lemon, peachy aromas, potentially even kind of tropical fruit aromas like pineapple, melon, and mango in our wines. The acidity levels are really going to vary. We quite often see very high levels of acidity, but in our warmer sites like Central Valley or the northern end of Napa, we can see acidity kind of drop into more medium levels. For quality wine production, we are generally going to see a lot of vanilla and oaky aromas from long-term maturation in barrels. Some of our less expensive, more mid-price and affordable Chardonnays may not see too much of this kind of characteristic, but it's certainly going to be present in the majority of premium quality Chardonnays. Cabernet Sauvignon is our second most planted variety, and plantings are increasing, so it may well soon catch up and potentially overtake Chardonnay in terms of planting in the state. This is a great variety, again, that really thrives in warmer climates, needing more heat over the summer to ripen, especially as it has lots of tannins that themselves really need a long time on the vine ripening. So we're going to see lots and lots of tannins develop. This is a great variety that even in warm climates will be able to provide high levels of acidity to help balance that high level of tannin. We're going to see lots of black fruit flavors, particularly black currants. It's also a very herbaceous grape variety. So we'll see lots of herbal aromas, particularly kind of like a mentholy, almost eucalyptus-y mint aroma in the state, and lots of green bell pepper aromas also being developed in many of our wines. This is a great variety that will typically see lots of oak maturation. This helps soften the big, intense tannic structure of our grape variety, and whilst also providing us with some more complexity and spicy aromas from the oak barrels itself. Wherever you find Cabernet Sauvignon in the world, you're often going to find its best friend Merlot. Merlot is widely planted across California and is often going to be blended with Cabernet Sauvignon. It has less tannins and less acidity, being kind of moderate in both. And it gives us a range of flavors, very plummy with red and black plums. Lots of kind of blackberry fruits as well can be developed in this warm climate. Like its kind of more intense friend, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot really benefits from some added aromas and complexity from barrel aging, so will often be done. Now, Merlot here and Cabernet Sauvignon being incredibly tannic, incredibly acidic, can sometimes really benefit from the softening effects of Merlot. And Merlot, having less tannins and less acidity, can often benefit from having a little bit more of an injection. So these grape varieties, as I said, will often be found across the world, and in particular in California, in similar locations, being blended together to create lots of different styles that have the strengths of both. So again, our north coast, where we're going to be really focusing, Napa, as I said, the southern end is much cooler, but as we move further north, it gets much warmer, and this is where we're going to find large amounts of Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot being planted. Sonoma, as it's closer to the coast, is going to have a few more distinct kind of microclimates, with some areas getting a bit more of that cooling effect from the ocean. So our coastal areas are very suitable for Pinot Noir. As we move inland, Russian River gets some cooler spots that make it suitable for some Pinot Noir production, but also for the production of grape varieties such as Sauvignon Blanc, which are quite widely planted in the state as well. As we move further to the north, Alexander Valley becomes warm again, and this is more suitable for the production of quite intense, full-bodied Cabernet Sauvignon-based wines and Merlot-based wines. So a quick nod towards Sauvignon Blanc in California. We can see quite a distinctive style being produced. So in across the world, we will often see lots of intense floral notes and herbaceous notes, and we do get quite a bit of that green bell pepper and kind of cut grass aroma in our Sauvignon Blancs in America, in California. We saw lots of intense apple and citrus aromas with very high levels of acidity. Sauvignon Blanc is often referred to as Fumé Blanc in California, and when we see Fumé Blanc on the label, we kind of quite often expect our wines to have some oak maturation. It's not always done like it is in many premium Chardonnays and Cabernet Sauvignons in the States, but it is a quite distinctive style that adds that typical aromas of wood spice to our Sauvignon Blanc wines. And this is very different to, say, how other famous producers of Sauvignon Blanc will typically do it, like in New Zealand or in Chile. So it adds a kind of its own unique spin to this grape variety. As I said, these will be found in places like Russian River Valley and the Sonoma coast in Sonoma County. That's not all I want to mention on the North Coast. As I say, it's a very important area for grape production. So further north than on Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley, we get Anderson Valley in Mendocino County. And this is a wonderful center for sparkling wine production. We get a lot of cooling influence coming in from the coast, and this means it's suitable for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And we do see producers make some non-sparkling versions of these grape varieties. But these grape varieties are blended together and created in the traditional method to create some exceptional world-class sparkling wines as well. And some of my favorite sparkling wines come from here. Another area I wanted to mention is Lodi. This is a sub-region of the Central Valley, but one of those areas that has a reputation for producing premium quality wines on a grape variety that is very famous in California that we haven't mentioned so far, called Zinfandel. Lodi gets the benefit of some cooling influences coming off the Sacramento Delta that help preserve some of the freshness of this grape variety. Zinfandel is a grape variety that is quite intensely fruity with lots of black fruit flavors like black plum, black cherry. It'll often be aged in oak barrels, giving us a particular kind of vanilla, spicy, almost coconutty kind of characteristic. It's a grape variety that has relatively high levels of acidity and relatively high levels of tannin, sitting between kind of medium and high for both these kind of areas. What we see, which is quite particular for Zinfandel in the state, is it often, even as a young wine, giving us kind of raisin and dried fruit characteristics. And especially in places like Lodi, where we see a lot of this grape variety being planted. There is a particular reason why this occurs. So Zinfandel has a kind of unusual quirk when it ripens. Not all grapes on the bunch ripen at the same rate. So we'll see some grape varieties that still almost remain kind of green in our bunches. And we'll see other grapes that have ripened very quickly. And by the time we are ready to harvest, these will have shriveled on the vine and turned into raisins themselves. So if we take all these bunches of grapes and we process these into wine, we will see both fresh fruit flavors and some kind of raisin fruit flavors resulting as well. So it can lead to some intensely complex and very, very fruity wines in particular. And they are absolutely phenomenal. I can highly recommend to anyone who wants to try them. Okay, so leaving California behind and moving north now, we see both the states of Washington and Oregon. Oregon is got not a huge amount of plantings, just about 1% of all American wines come out of Oregon, but it is getting remarked for some very high quality expressions indeed. It gets just enough cooling influence from the ocean, and being further to the north, it's going to be typically cooler than California. This makes it superb for the production of Pinot Noir, and Pinot Noir accounts for about 80% of all production coming out of Oregon, and it's noted to have really high levels of acidity here and some in very intense red fruit flavors, and it will typically have those oak barrel flavors as well. Our second most planted grape variety in Oregon is Pinot Gris, and this is a white grape variety, and it produces a big range of styles, and it produces a big range of styles in Oregon as well. It can be both dry in expression and off dry, but generally getting really ripe flavors of citrus fruits, apple and pear, and some stone fruit characteristics. The majority of these wines will be medium in acidity levels, with some producers aiming to get a much fresher, higher acid kind of expression as well. And it can be much riper in expression than a Pinot Grigio that you might find in northern Italy. So if you're looking for something that has recognizable flavors, but a little bit more intensity, then Oregon could be a good place to go. Going back to our map, going further north, Washington is our second most planted state in America, with over 5% of all of America's plantings. And we can see we're much further inland, and we're to the east of the Cascade Mountains, which block really any of the cooling effects of the ocean from really getting to our grape growing areas. We do have some areas that are cooled by slightly higher altitude, but generally, because of this kind of exclusion from these cooling effects, we have really intensely warm summers. But being further to the north, even though we have really warm daytime temperatures, we actually see quite cool nights. And this is really suitable for grape growing, because it is able to give us really intensely fruity wines, but still maintaining freshness and acidity in our grape varieties. We see lots of different grape varieties. Cabernet and Merlot are our most planted in the States, giving us really fantastic high quality wines here. And for our white grape varieties, Chardonnay and Riesling are often very much planted. Riesling favoring the slightly more cooler areas, and Chardonnay being planted widely across all areas in Washington. Yakima Valley is a subregion in Columbia Valley that is noted for particularly high quality wines from all of these grape varieties. And then our last area that I want to talk about is jumping now over to the northeast of the country and to New York State. And the majority of our plantings in this state are going to be close to the Canadian border in an area known as Finger Lakes. And you can see these kind of long, narrow lakes that give the region its name. These really help viticulture in New York, as they really help kind of moderate the temperature. Even though these are very narrow lakes, they're incredibly deep, with some of the lakes reaching 200 meters in depth. And this acts like giant radiators. They heat up over the course of the summer and then help radiate that heat out into the autumn, helping to extend the growing season in an area which would otherwise be too cold for producing quality wines. These lakes really also help us in the winter in warming up the local temperature. Otherwise, the vines may freeze over the winter months as it gets very cold in this part of the world. Because it's much cooler than we'll see in Washington at similar latitudes, we're going to see a different range of grape varieties being planted that really thrive in these cool temperatures. And in particular, we have Riesling in this state doing particularly well for quality wines. We'll see a huge range of styles being made. They'll be noted for having very high levels of acidity, but incredibly ripe and intense fruity notes, such as lime, peach, maybe even some pineapple aromas. Producers in this state will produce wines of a range of sweetness levels from dry to very sweet, similar to the great Rieslings of Northern Europe. And yeah, absolutely fantastic quality can be found if you're a big fan of Riesling. Washington State and New York State is a place to go. So that's all from me. So I'll quickly look at our questions, if there's any that you'd like to post in the chat. Thank you so much for paying attention. First question, would in general Californian Pinot Noir be aged mostly in American oak barrels, where Oregon would be in French oak? So this is a really good question, because that's something we cover in our courses. There is a difference between the American species of oak and European oak, which European oak generally gives more subtle aromas than American, which can give us some really bold and intense flavors. Now, due to Pinot Noir being a little bit more delicate than things like Cabernet Sauvignon or Zinfandel, we generally find that producers in both California and Oregon will tend to use European sourced oak, like French or etc. Whereas our more bold grape varieties, we will see some producers using European and some producers using American, depending on their own particular style. Pauline has asked if Primitivo also ripens in the uneven way that Zinfandel does. Yes, indeed, it does. So Primitivo and Zinfandel are actually the same grape variety. Primitivo in the south of Italy is what it's referred to, and Zinfandel is the name that it's referred to in California. So they both have this genetic quirk that means that we get this uneven ripening. And Primitivos from Puglia in Italy are often have this characteristic as well, with this slightly raisin dried fruit characteristic. Almost every state in the US has vineyards of some type. Is there a newer region to keep an eye on, perhaps due to climate change? That's a very good question. I would see maybe actually Oregon, even though it's quite a well-known region, it has quite a small amount of planting, and it's only really been in the last few decades that this has come to the attention. So I think this is an area that might be able to expand into new parts of that state. But there's a lot of wine being grown in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio. Pretty much every state has some vineyards, as you correctly identified. So some potentially more suitable than others. We're just going to see what the future holds. Which really nicely goes to Sarah's question. Climate change is going to be affecting viticulture across the world, as it's going to be affecting most industries in the next few decades. So it's a lot of attention is being drawn to this, and hoping to be able to, like Ismail says, open up new regions and explore new styles and maybe new grape varieties in our more classic regions. Milos asks, very oaky Chardonnay from the US, do you see a change over time to more modern style? Or do you think boldness is still going to be held on as a potential marketing opportunity? Look, producers are going to be able to produce both styles, I think is going to be the correct answer. A more fresher, more lighter style of Chardonnay we will see, but there is still a huge support for rich and intense oaky style of Chardonnays. So I think there are room for both to exist together, and I think that's a fantastic thing. So even though we might see people confess that they prefer lighter styles of Chardonnay, I have managed to pay my mortgage for many months by selling incredibly rich, very oaky Chardonnays from Napa. So I think it will continue. Finger Lakes region, is there any Mr. Fogs that are unable to produce botrytis wines? Yes, there are, and we're seeing producers experiment with producing wines which have the impact of botrytis. Yes, so keep an eye out there. More and more that I am finding, and they are fantastic. And do I know of any American wineries that solely use oak barrels? I'm not entirely sure. I know Ridge, which is a very famous producer in Sonoma County, have a tendency to use very high proportions of American oak barrels. So that would be where I would potentially go. And that nicely leads on to Emma's question, what's my favorite American wine? I absolutely love the wines of Ridge. So Geyserville in particular is a Zinfandel that I show in our wine school, and I absolutely smile every time we open it because I think it's going to be absolutely fantastic. Then Verity asked if America was called Vinland because of the abundance of wine grapes. Where are native American wines? Is anyone making wines from varietals that originally here? I don't have a great answer to that question, but what I will say is the varietals are not the same species as the grape varieties that we use, that we're responsible for our are great varieties like Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon. They do produce some very unusual aromas, but some people do make wine from them, especially in kind of the northeast of the country, where we see the large proportion of these grapes. They are widely grown, but they're usually turned into jellies, jams, and or for eating. And that's where they're much more suitable. So I'm unsure about indigenous people making wine in the past, but I would love to find out more about that. And with that, I would like to say thank you. Thank you all. Just to wrap up. Sorry if I didn't get to answer all your questions. Thank you so much for watching. If you could please complete the feedback poll that will pop up on your screens. The recording, of course, will be emailed to everyone, as well as being available to watch on the WSET Events Hub on our YouTube, where you can catch up on all previous events as well. And just a quick reminder, if you want to sign up for any of our qualifications, then please do visit our website at wsetglobal.com. Thank you so much. Happy 4th of July and take care.